Hello and welcome back to Old Soul Podcast. My name is Bria. It's with AI. Thank you so much. Today's film commentary is going to be about the film titled Rye Lane. It was released in 2023 and it has a rating of rated R and it has a runtime of 1 hour and 22 minutes. The director's name is Raine Miller. So I realized pretty quickly with this film that I was probably going to talk more about a quick summary and what I feel like the essence and the story of the film is, and what sort of gravitated toward me when watching it, and what stood out, and why I feel like this is one of the best films of 2023. So, this film takes place in the setting of, I believe it was South London, but overall somewhere specifically in London. And we have two main characters. One is named Dom, and the other is named Yaz. And basically, the story is about two main characters who meet each other at a point in their lives where their relationships and maybe just their careers and the central points of their lives and their beings are not really at the best that they would like them to be. Dom specifically, we see right away, is crying in a bathroom stall at like a art gallery that he's at. It seems like it's a gallery or an exhibition. His close friend has his artwork up and he's there in support, but he call him his close mate, probably his close mate is what they say. And so he's crying in the restroom because his girlfriend, well, he caught his girlfriend sleeping with one of his best mates, or otherwise his best friend. And basically she's cheating on him, and she's cheating on him with his best friend, and so he's trying to deal with the after effects of that. And he, I think, recently has moved back in with his parents. He said that he had moved out once before and then he had to move back in, and so he's dealing with that change. But he does seem to like his job. I believe he's an accountant, entry level or associate's level, and so that's like one of the things that seems to be very stable with Dom. And something I noticed about Dom right away too is that he still holds back, and I think to some extent, if he would let that loose, which he does in the film when he meets Yaz, he would probably be able to move on, or begin to move on from the relationship that he was once in, and past a lot of the basically like trauma that his friend and his girlfriend, his now ex-girlfriend, put on him. But he always gives people the benefit of the doubt. So like, even when he's talking about what was done to him by two people that he trusted and most likely really cared about, he still was like, well, there's probably things that I did too to her that, like, she would bring up, and there's probably a long list. Like, he still, throughout the film, gives her the benefit of the doubt. And I think that's what I like about his character, that he seems to be very open-minded and kind at heart, but he probably doesn't give himself enough credit, and that's, I wouldn't say it's his downfall, but it's definitely a fault to some extent. We have the other character that we focus on named Yaz. She's really funny and extroverted, whereas I feel like Dom's a little more introverted. She meets Dom the first time in that restroom. It's a unisex restroom. And she hears him crying, and she does sort of pity him, and he doesn't really know that he was caught by her in the beginning. He finds out later that she was sort of pitying him and knew that he was the one crying in the restroom. She's also at the art gallery because his friend, who is the artist who is being displayed, their art is being displayed, has a girlfriend who Yaz is close friends with. Yaz is also there because of her close mate being there, and or best friend. She has recently gone through a breakup, but for Yaz, she sort of frames that breakup as something that she initiated, and she broke up with her sort of a douchebag boyfriend who also happens to be in the art scene, because they're all in the art scene. Most of them. We find out that really she was the one who was broken up with, and she feels humiliated, and he's already gotten a new girlfriend like 3 months later, so that's hurtful to her. And she really is more of a person that like sort of lashes out and does adventure, and sometimes to the extremes. She's really good at telling lies and stories, And sometimes it's helpful. So, like, right after they meet, Dom goes up and meets with his ex girlfriend and his current best friend, which he still seems to be friends with him even toward the end of the film, but I wish he wouldn't have been. I think his friend like helps him move at some point, and that's sort of up in the air, but he's definitely still really upset about the situation. And he, along the way to go to that meeting after he went to the art gallery and bought some of his friends' art and looked around, which was sort of persuaded out of him in some way to buy that or make that purchase. He and Yaz talk a whole way and sort of get to know each other and what they're wanting. And there's even a scene of them at the park. And quickly we see that something that really stood out to me, besides the interesting characters in the storyline and their background, is that the film has a really interesting way of approaching its framing. But it sort of feels like we're in this scope of a fishbowl where they're moving constantly and the pacing is constantly going. There's constantly conversation, but in the background you can see kids like doing dances on their phone, or um, they're at a market and people are selling things, and there's so many very vibrant and bright and beautiful stylistic choices when it comes to just the background staging and the stylist of the clothes that they're wearing and color in general. And we even get this sort of shout out ode to rom-coms when a certain character or actor shows up on screen as one of like a street food vendor, or maybe just like a market vendor selling food to them, and they end up getting food from him. And that's really a lovely moment to rom-coms. And even though the sadness of the background of the characters' situations and their relationships and the sort of climb that they're trying to make in certain career choices, specifically with Yaz, she wants to get into fashion, but what she's doing currently isn't what she wants to do. And it seems like there's no way for her to get to the top without doing some sort of cheap or otherwise free labor, which people cannot afford to do, obviously. And so there's that situation, more context to what Yaz is going through as well. And so I just think that's really cool. And sometimes the film sort of feels like there's just different present modes of framing in the film, and it becomes a character of its own because it is so consistent throughout the film and so beautifully done. Basically, throughout the film, we see our two characters getting to know each other after basically running into each other in a restroom, being complete strangers, telling basically the worst of what's going on in their life, or finding out in one way or another and helping each other out. I think Yaz helping Dom out was her going and meeting up at that restaurant, even though he wasn't expecting her to show up, and helping him out, sort of not making him look as sort of pitiful as he does, even though he shouldn't feel that way. He was the one who was wronged. He probably does feel that way, and his ex-girlfriend and his mate, best mate, are really not great people. And then Yaz gets help from Dom when Dom helps her get her record back from her ex, where they basically break into her ex's apartment. But first, they stop at a family cookout, who is the family of Yaz's ex boyfriend, who tend to really like Yaz, and they kind of help her out with getting the key. They run into her ex, and that's when he finds out that Yaz has been lying to him, but he still stands up for her in front of them, and I think that's lovely of him. And we see Yaz sort of get exposed on her lies. And then they fight, and we have this whole montage of them like going through their day to day after they fought and after their whole adventure of talking, going through the markets, and basically being and existing in London. And I'd say London and the camera work are their own character in the film, and I really love that. And I also like the mundaneness of the film, the normalcy, the I guess day-to-day boringness of humanity and faults of humans being displayed on screen in a way that sometimes is fun, sweet, lovely, awkward, quirky, oddball sort of way. And then the characters meet again, of course, at another sort of art gallery exhibition for the same mate that they originally met through in the beginning of the film. But this time, the art that is on display is not mouths, it is butts, which is a whole thing, and you'll get if you watch the film, which just makes it more oddball and outlandish, but it still works very well. and they make up in a very romantic rom-com-y way. And of course, there's a lot of stuff to flesh out in between, but that's for you to watch and for me to convince you to see. So I'm going to break down a few things that stood out before I go to my quote segment. So basically, one thing that stood out was the way that the film approaches angles and shots, etc. There's constant motion, which I spoke about before with pacing. Everyday people, normal streets, markets, and the normalcy of it all wrapped into falling for someone, which you can see the two characters falling for each other slowly but surely. There's even points where they kiss each other. They have this whole karaoke chemistry in front of everyone, which is really funny because basically when Yaz went to help Dom and he was on that meeting up with his ex-girlfriend and his best mate, she said that they met because of karaoke, and then that was a complete lie, but they sold it pretty well to make it believable, making his ex extra jealous. But then later in the film, they actually basically create that scene because they end up at a karaoke bar and they end up doing karaoke, and that scene becomes a reality. That's really interesting to me, and it works really well. And then we have something else that stood out a lot to me personally is how memories become interactive. The characters in the present are often watching the memory as one of the other characters are describing it, and they even place themselves in that memory or the context of the story being told physically within the memory or the thought. So, for example, Dom basically talks about some instance when he had a few dates with his ex-girlfriend and how they went pretty badly, like she didn't show up, or she hated the date when she did show up. And in both those times when he was recreating and telling the story or otherwise the memory, Yaz and him are both staring at his memory of him detailing the memory. It isn't in black and white. It isn't like we go off screen into another world. They're physically watching it. The memory is a part of the diegesis in which the current characters are watching the memory. And it's so tangible that the characters even are like at that theater and they're grabbing popcorn as they're watching the memory of the character who's telling the story. It's so good. And I just was like, wow, that is clever. Okay. And then the final thing is just the romance growing from Yaz and Dom, meeting as strangers in the most interesting spaces and sometimes mostly awkward spaces. And I talked about him crying and Yaz getting broken up with. But when they're brought together, they bring out the good in each other, or they bring out things that maybe their exes would never bring out in them because they're more meant to be than they were with the others who are now their exes. And they're exes for a reason. Ultimately, the film was a great experience, and I do definitely recommend it. Some of my favorite scenes, I liked how art was incorporated through the film, from visuals to music, etc. I loved the clear use of rom-com energy and clever ways that it was shot and integrated with certain shout-outs. Again, I talked about the nice pops of colors and styling. Sometimes it felt like, in terms of sets, background, it felt like they were in a theatrical way on stage. There was a few scenes like that. I think when Yaz was detailing her memory, Dom was watching her memory just like she was watching his memory, but they were both physically there and in that interactive way. But when Dom was watching Yaz's memory, it felt like they were on a stage and it was very over the top, overtly comical. And I wonder if maybe that choice was done because Yaz was sort of lying about her memory, whereas Dom wasn't. But it was still interactive and it felt like it was a theater that they were in. And that was kind of a cool take to get from that. One thing that I will mention is I didn't really understand a lot of the slang, and I don't, I'm American and this is British, I believe South London, and so I didn't really understand some of the slang, and I feel like I will want to watch it again with subtitles and maybe start doing some Googles because I do feel like you could miss some sort of humor and context without understanding what they're talking about. And so that's one thing that personally, just for me, would be a user error or otherwise an audience issue. Just more research I would do. But other than that, I have to say, this is one film where I really liked everything that was going on so much more than the story. And that isn't to say the story was boring or that the story wasn't good enough. I think everything was good. And I do think there was a good balance, but I just think that the film itself, what the camera was doing, was just so visually interesting and pleasing that it just made everything better. And I just really enjoyed that. And that really was a cherry on top of everything. So I have one quote and then I will be done. Okay. Dom, you know, you're very, yes. Peng? Refreshingly disarming? Dom, you ask a lot of questions. Yes. I'm interested in people's messes. Dom, what makes you think I've got a mess? Yes. Everyone has a mess. All right, and that's all. I hope you go watch Rye Lane. Thanks. Bye.
Everything all right in there?
Trying to have a private moment?
My bad. It's not that private though.